Let's talk to Steve Hewlett, presenter of the media show on Radio 4, Damian Collins, Conservative MP, who thinks the licence fee is an outdated way of funding the BBC, Kevin Marsh, former BBC editor, and to Jassa Ahluwalia, who is the star of BBC3's Some Girls. Welcome, all of you. Steve Hewlett, first of all, confirmation of the BBC3 decision because TV viewing is moving online.
That's what they say. I mean, superficially, the BBC has a reasonably compelling case. You know, consumer behaviour is changing. They say the future of broadcast is online, and not only that, they've now said that they think what they can offer online is actually better and more distinctive than anything they had on TV.
How is that possible, then?
This is a traditional BBC phenomenon. When forced by circumstances to do something they didn't really want to do, by the time they actually do it, they say it's the best thing that could possibly have happened. Remember them moving breakfast TV from London to Manchester. It was forced on them by circumstances beyond their control. I'm not saying it's a bad thing to have done, but by the time it happened, it was the best thing since sliced bread. So one has to take this with a certain amount of a pinch of salt. But look, it is not the most unreasonable thing to do. However, they consulted the public, 80% of whom said leave it as it is. They came to the view, in their own report they say, that they expect a decline in viewership and reach amongst key audiences, young people, black, Asian and minority ethnic viewers and women from lower income families. They expect this decline to occur when they move it off TV and onto online. And the other thing is this, even if you buy all the arguments about how consumer behaviour is changing, and I think in some respects, and even the BBC would accept this, they are ahead of the curve here. It hasn't quite got to that point yet. TV is still predominantly the way that people get their content, even on BBC3. 75% of 16 to 24-year-olds viewing access of BBC3 is on TV. So it hasn't kind of got there yet. But even if you accept all those arguments, it still represents a 50% cut in the content budget applied to these key audiences who are some of the most underserved that the BBC tries to deal with. So I think the message it's sending is as problematic, actually, as the details of what's going to happen.
Before I bring everyone else in, I just want to ask you about other things that might be forced on the BBC in the future in terms of cuts. A report in The Guardian today suggesting that there is a £150 million shortfall in the forecast budget of the BBC because those watching TV on iPlayer don't have to pay for a licence fee. Now, you know, compared to the whole budget, that's not a massive amount. It's still a significant amount of money. Does that sound about right to you?
Well, the BBC, I understand the BBC have done some modelling. This is people who are now more prone to declare. See, if you don't watch TV as broadcast, in other words, if you only watch it on catch-up, it doesn't matter what device you use, if you only watch on-demand catch-up, strictly speaking, legally, you don't need to pay a licence fee. So people are taking the option of self-declaring as never using BBC services as broadcast. Whether that's actually true or not in every case, to be honest, I sort of doubt. I'd be surprised if there are many people who don't catch the news sometimes. And you only have to do it once, and in a sense, legally you're caught. So that's possible. But look, the Charter review process has just kicked off. It was delayed because of the general election. We're now in kind of hyperdrive, and everywhere you look, you'll see scare stories about the BBC from all sides. You know, cancel the licence fee, shut the corporation. On one hand, and the BBC, however, would say this: look, if you take the frozen licence fee since 2010. The top slicing, in other words, the money taken from the licence fee to spend on broadband rollout, S4C, the World Service, we're talking hundreds of millions of pounds. If you add in this 150, and if they were to be forced to pay for the cost or meet the cost of over 75's licence fees, which at the moment the government pays to the BBC on behalf of over 75's who get the service free, it's currently running at 700 million plus. But of course, what's happening to the population? It's getting older. So if nothing changes, whoever picks up the bill for over 75 licence fees is looking at a massive increase in costs. Now, if that were all to happen, I don't imagine for a second it will, if it were all to happen, you're touching £1 billion. Right. Now, that's not a cut to the BBC, that's kind of cancel, start again. Yeah,
well, that's a third of its, just under a third of its annual income. Jassa, welcome to the programme. Now, you were in Some Girls on BBC3. 429,000 people watched the last episode on the television. It was requested 1.42 million times on iPlayer. What does that tell you?
I mean, I think Some Girls was, I mean, it's one show of many that's on BBC3. Some Girls was established on the linear channel. I mean, yes, I was very proud of the fact when I first got involved with this debate, I was actually on the other side. I was saying, you know, the home of pioneering new content should be on should have a pioneering home. But, you know, that was before I started looking at the facts, and the fact was that Some Girls started, the First Series 1 was linear broadcast. Series 2, yes, had online premieres, but that's just not the overall. If you look at the statistics, that's just not what the general audience behaviour is. 94% of viewers are watching on the linear broadcast. Only 6% are watching online. You know, we're talking about basically getting rid of this huge number of people that are watching the TV shows and taking them online, because, you know, people are saying, well, young people are watching online. It's just not the case. That's
all right. Well, bearing in mind
that.
what you've said, Kevin Marsh, what would you say to Jassa about why you think it's right to take BBC3 off air?
I think Jassa's sort of right and sort of wrong. I mean, the fact of the matter is, yes, as Steve says, the BBC is ahead of the curve here. But it was ahead of the curve in '96 when it said news has got to go online. The then Director General John Burt stamped his foot, it went online, and he was right. You have to be ahead of the curve sometimes. I think Jassa is right for now, but in a few years' time, few years down the line, clearly more people are watching on a variety of platforms. Mobile is a thing that none of us thought it was going to be a huge thing 5 years ago. It's now the thing. So I think we have to be ahead of the curve at the BBC sometimes. And on this occasion, you have to understand too that the idea of watching, all sitting down together in front of the TV set and watching at the same time, great, it worked for that show, but it doesn't work for all content. And actually, a lot of people want to watch these shows in their own time. They want to binge on them. You know, the old box set phenomenon, which is, you know, in front of us all.
I can see you looking sceptical.
This is the comparison that's used, is that, like, well, Netflix are doing it, you know, well, Amazon are doing it. This is the way in which TV is evolving. I mean, that's just not the case. Like, you can't compare BBC3 to Netflix and Amazon. You know, BBC3 is the home of pioneering new content, new talent, whereas Netflix...
And the BBC says it will continue to invest in new talent.
But that's the real point here. It's the level of investment. It's the level of investment in programming that actually matters. I think the platforms will come and go.
It will be
change.
cut for BBC3.
Well, sure, and that is the real issue. That's the real issue. It's not which platform it's
on. And already only 1% of the BBC budget is being spent on the kind of young and diverse audiences.
Not only is it's cut in half for the BBC3 audience, the plan is to spend the money on more drama for BBC One.
Right.
But that's the real issue.
Is that not a good thing for viewers?
Well, yes, it is. But look, I mean, at some level, you have to accept the BBC can't do everything. You know, they live in straitened times. The licence fee, whatever else might happen in the future, the licence fee has been frozen since 2010. The top slice, the things taken from broadband rollout and all the rest of it, mean the BBC has faced 700+ million cuts. Tony Hall said it was about 26% cut thus far by the end of the next year in what the BBC. So they are no doubt they are in straitened times, so they can't do everything. But the question is whether, strategically, this is a sensible move to make.
All right, Damian Collins, Conservative MP, what do you think?
Well, the BBC has to focus on what it wants to do best, and that should be great content. And the budget that it has should be about delivering that. I think there has been a bit of a trend with new channels emerging over the last few years, that some of the bolder, riskier content goes on more discrete channels, where in the past it might have gone on BBC Two, it might have had a bigger audience earlier, and I think the BBC will have to be slightly more creative. I think you can also look at other areas of commissioning and say, is this really something which is, you know, distinctive and high quality? So take a programme like The Voice, which lots of people watch, but that's a format bought from a Dutch production company that's now owned by ITV, that is run as a competitor to a similar programme that already runs on a commercial channel. Now, is that where the priority should be?
But if they weren't getting ratings on a Saturday night, you'd be criticising the BBC for failing.
Well, no, because the job of the BBC is not to win a ratings competition against ITV. The job of the Saturday night schedule should be to produce something popular.
I can hear you, Si. I can see you raising your eyebrows to heaven.
On the face of it, that sounds like a perfectly sensible argument. But what we have is a broadcasting ecology, where there are competitive forces going on in between. Now, I put this to you: the X Factor is a better show than it would ever have been now because of The Voice. The fact that you have them in competition, it's like Coronation Street and EastEnders. The fact that they're in competition, ostensibly doing the same thing, ultimately is a benefit to viewers because it all improves as a consequence.
I don't agree with that comparison. I think something like Strictly is a great example of something which has been a huge commercial success, but was probably at the time a slightly risky, you know, the idea of celebrity ballroom dancing competition was not an easy sell, and something a non-commercial organisation like the BBC could say, we're going to take a punt on this, we're going to make it work. And probably the huge success of Strictly has made things like the X Factor better because that's a stronger competitor.
But so is The Voice.
Yeah, but I'm not sure that's as clear. I'm not sure the role of the BBC to be running similar type format programmes bought in from another country is the best example of BBC commissioning.
Jassa, you want to come in?
Yeah, I just don't quite see what this is really got to do with the BBC3 move. I mean, this is not about, it's not just about it being a BBC3 moving online. It is mainly about this fact that the content budget is going to be cut. Like I say, already 1% of the budget is spent on this young, underserved audience. There's great stuff that is being made, but if you're going to start cutting the budgets, then not as much is going to be able to be made, and people just aren't going to be able to see it.
So bearing in mind, funding is reducing, it is being constricted even further, and I don't know what you think, Steve Hewlett, but it feels like a very sort of intense period in the run-up to this charter renewal. Is it any more intense than any other run-up to charter renewal?
It is more intense,
right.
And the reason for that is that the timescale has been truncated.
Right.
This normally takes sort of 3 years. Last time, the government set up a commission under Lord Burns, who's now the chairman of Channel 4. It took evidence over 9 months, considered its conclusions, advised the Secretary of State. It went on for quite a long time, this. Because of the election, this has been completely truncated. Now, if you work backwards, it's got to be agreed and done and dusted by the end of 2016. That's when the charter runs out. To cut a long story short, this is going to have to be done by Christmas. That is a very, very short time indeed.
All right. In terms of what we're going to see on the BBC over the next 10 years, content-wise, programme-wise, what do you think, Kevin?
Well, I think the really important thing here is the distinction between the licence fee and the way of funding the BBC and its status as a public service broadcaster and what that really means. And some of what Dominic was saying was quite right, that it should be taking risks. That's kind of where the public, I think, would like the BBC to spend its money. It would also like those risks to come off, to be successful, like Gavin and Stacey, like all the shows that have grown from 3 and 4 and grown onto the major networks. The key thing, though, that I worry about is that we allow the difficulties in this debate about about the licence fee and whether it's appropriate. It clearly isn't, and something else has got to take its place. We allow that debate to infect, if you like, the debate about whether we want a public service broadcaster
two
in this
separate
country.
things. But on the subject of the licence fee, what do you believe would be a better way of funding it in the future?
Well, the House Commons Select Committee looked at this. I mean, a good alternative model for still a publicly funded BBC would be the example in Germany, where you don't have a licence fee based on owning an old television set, but it's a property-based levy, assuming that people in the house consume television. Something else I think is exciting for the BBC
why is that better?
Well, it's if you wanted to have a sort of a publicly gathered levy, but you avoid the issue that Steve set out earlier, which is what happens if you watch catch-up on a tablet, but you don't watch it live on a television box. The licence fee doesn't solve that problem. But I think the BBC should also be looking to make more money out of iPlayer. I think if you want to watch catch-up TV on demand after the 7-day or 3-week period, want to watch the back catalogue of BBC programming, why not pay a Netflix-type subscription to watch that? And I think the BBC could bring a lot of commercial revenue that way and still remain true to its objectives. I couldn't agree more.
There's so much value tied up in the back catalogue. Yeah. There's so much value tied up there.
Okay.
So why aren't also the alternatives to the BBC3 being moved online being discussed? I mean, it was in the BBC Trust issued their report yesterday, but it was a kind of like a cursory glance given to the fact that guys like Jimmy Mulville have been trying to push for actual alternatives. I mean, BBC3 took 10 years and £1 billion to kind of set up. In what other sphere other than the BBC would it be okay to turn around and go, yeah, you know what, let's just turn it into a website?
Okay. I don't think it was quite as simple as, yeah, let's just turn it into a website, but I take the point, Jassa.
Well, that's, I'm here representing my demographic. That's how it feels,
absolutely.
Being shunned once again.
Thank you for representing them. Thank you very much. Your views welcome. You can email Victoria at bbc.co.uk. Thank you all very much.